Maybe it's night where you are, and everything feels still. Somewhere beyond your window, a small shape moves through the grass, nose twitching, spines lifting like a tiny forest in motion. Tonight, we're wandering beside one of nature's quiet survivors, the hedgehog. Together we'll uncover its hidden routines, peculiar habits, and the quiet intelligence that keeps it alive in the dark. If these calm journeys help you unwind, I'd love for you to subscribe and join us again. Now take a slow breath, and let's follow the hedgehog into the night. Chapter 1. Not related to porcupines. You've probably seen both hedgehogs and porcupines in photos, cartoons, or maybe even as a pet or zoo exhibit, and thought they were basically the same animal dressed in spikes. That's a totally understandable first impression. I used to mix them up too. But once you start looking closer, the differences jump out, and they tell a really interesting story about how nature solves the same problem in different ways. First off, porcupines and hedgehogs aren't close relatives. Porcupines are true rodents, big, slow, plant-eating rodents with long, stiff quills that can detach and sometimes even embed in predators. There are two main groups: Old World porcupines, which are ground-dwelling and belong to the family Hystricidae, and New World porcupines in the family Erethizontidae, many of which are tree climbers. Hedgehogs, on the other hand, belong to their own family, Erinaceidae, and are grouped with things like moles and shrews in the order Eulipotyphla. So taxonomically, they live in very different branches of the mammal family tree. That difference in lineage also shows up in behavior and body plan. Porcupines can be fairly large and lumbering. Their quills are long and can be loosely attached, so they come away to frustrate a predator. Hedgehogs are smaller, more compact, and their spines, which are modified hairs, are generally fixed in place. Hedgehogs' defense strategy is to curl into a tight ball, presenting a coat of spines on all sides. I remember seeing a hedgehog at a wildlife rescue and watching it transform into a perfect little armored ball at the slightest noise, almost like a hedgehog-level superpower. Dietary habits differ too. Porcupines are herbivores, often gnawing bark, twigs, and leaves. Hedgehogs tend to be insectivorous, snuffling through undergrowth for beetles, worms, and other small invertebrates. That means their lifestyles, where they live, how they move, even the structure of their teeth, evolved for different jobs, despite both ending up with protective spikes. Here's the neat part. Their similarity is a classic case of convergent evolution. Nature faced the same problem: how to deter predators, and two very different lineages arrived at a superficially similar solution: sharp, protective spines. It's like two designers independently inventing raincoats made of the same material because it keeps the wearer dry, even though they never collaborated or shared blueprints. Convergent evolution pops up all over biology, and spines are an elegant example. Different animals, different ancestries, similar selective pressures. I find that realizing this removes the one-size-fits-all thinking and opens up a sense of wonder. Think about how often we rely on first impressions. I certainly did with hedgehogs and porcupines. Both looked prickly, so I lumped them together. But once you peel back the layers, you see distinct lives and evolutionary paths. That's a good reminder that looks can be misleading, and that curiosity pays off. For anyone who keeps or dreams of keeping a hedgehog as a pet, that distinction matters. Hedgehogs are legal pets in some places, and are small, nocturnal, and insect-eating. Porcupines are wild, much larger, and not suitable as pets. Also, handling a hedgehog requires different care than dealing with a porcupine encounter in the wild. Knowing the difference can keep both you and the animal safer. So next time you see a picture of a prickly mammal, take a beat. Is it a rodent with long detachable quills, or a small insectivore that curls up into a spiky ball? That small question opens up a whole story about evolution, ecology, and why so many paths in nature lead to clever, convergent solutions. Chapter 2: Why the Spines Do Not Hurt Them. Think about the last time you pulled on a winter jacket, zipped it up, and felt instantly safer from the wind. That snug, protective feeling is a tiny human echo of what a hedgehog gets from its spines. But unlike a puffy coat or a wool hat, a hedgehog's defense is biological engineering. Thousands of spines that look fierce to us but are simply part of the animal's everyday armor. And because those spines are built into its body in a very particular way, they don't hurt the hedgehog itself. First, the basics. Each spine is a hollow, flexible tube. That matters. Hollow tubes are stiff enough to stand out and form a barrier, but they're also surprisingly light and bendable. Imagine a bundle of drinking straws glued into a tiny ball. They give structure without weighing you down. Every single spine is anchored in the skin by its own little socket and tiny muscles. Those muscles are the hedgehog's control system. When danger appears, the muscles contract and the skin tightens, turning the spines outward so they lock into a bristling shield. It's not random prickliness, it's coordinated and safe for the animal. When a hedgehog curls up, which, let's be honest, is both adorable and brilliant, it's not trying to be mean. It's doing something akin to pulling your hoodie up over your ears while folding into yourself on a cold day. The muscles around the spine follicles pull the skin taut over the back, arranging the spines so that they all point away from the body like the teeth of a protective comb. Because those spines are rooted in skin that can move and tighten, they don't push into the hedgehog's own flesh. Instead, the hedgehog wraps the soft belly and face inward, and the spines create an exterior shell. Underneath that shell, the hedgehog isn't sitting on a bed of needles. The skin under the spines is thick and built to absorb impacts. Think of it as a natural shock absorber, dense, resilient tissue that reduces the force from bites or small falls. If the hedgehog takes a tumble or meets a predator that tries to bite, those layers of skin and the muscles around them take the brunt of the contact, not the spine roots themselves. For an animal that frequently curls up on uneven ground or hustles through bramble, that padding matters a lot. Another reassuring fact: hedgehog spines are not barbed. I remember as a kid believing every wild creature's defenses were designed to injure anything that touched them, like nature's revenge. But hedgehog spines don't snag and tear flesh like a fishhook or porcupine quill might. They're smooth tubes. That makes it less likely for the hedgehog to accidentally wound itself when the spines rub together while curled. It also makes encounters with other animals less catastrophic than we imagine. The spines are primarily a deterrent, a message: I'm not worth the trouble. And because life isn't without wear and tear, hedgehogs have a slow but steady way of renewing their armor. When a spine gets damaged, snapped, or worn down, it doesn't spell permanent vulnerability. Spines are shed and regrown over time. It's a gradual process, not an overnight replacement, which is why hedgehogs have to be a bit careful during heavy molts. But overall, that constant, slow renewal is like having an auto repair system built into your jacket. A few seams frayed, but the material patches over weeks and months. All of this comes together to explain an important feeling we can all recognize: comfort in our own protection. Just like a favorite sweater that makes you feel secure on a blustery evening, the hedgehog's spines are an intrinsic part of its identity: reliable, manageable, and designed to keep the animal safe without causing it pain. They're tools, not weapons turned inward. The muscles, the flexible, hollow structure, and the thick skin underneath all cooperate so the hedgehog can curl, rest, and move through life with a shield that's effective and, crucially, harmless to the hedgehog itself. So next time you see a hedgehog curled tight into a perfect ball, try to imagine the quiet engineering at work. Thousands of hollow tubes, tiny muscles pulling the canvas of skin taut, a padded underlayer absorbing shocks, and a system that slowly replaces what's worn out. It's not just nature's spikiness for show. It's a thoughtfully crafted solution to staying safe, and one that keeps the hedgehog comfortable as well as protected. Chapter 3. Built for the Night Shift. Think about the last time you walked outside after midnight. The world feels different. The air is cooler, the streets quieter, and your senses naturally tune in. Footsteps sound louder. A faint scent of cut grass carries farther, and your eyes strain to make out shapes. For hedgehogs, that nighttime clarity isn't an occasional experience, it's their whole life. They're true night workers, cut from a nocturnal cloth that relies far less on sight and far more on the kinds of senses we often take for granted. Their eyes are modest. Up close, you can tell a hedgehog is not built to stare into the sun. Their vision is good enough to avoid obstacles, to notice movement, and to recognize broad shapes, especially in dim light. But when it comes to fine detail or color, they're not the champions. That isn't a flaw, it's a trade-off. Hedgehogs don't need to read road signs or pick out a specific leaf. They need to find food and remember the safe routes through their patch of the world. So evolution handed them something else: extraordinary hearing, and an almost uncanny sense of smell. If you've ever followed a dog in a park and watched it root out a hidden treat, you've had a little window into how an animal uses scent to understand its world. Hedgehogs take that performance to another level. Their nose can detect the faintest trail of scent, and their ears pick up the subtlest rustle underground. That means a hedgehog can tell there's a beetle burrowed beneath the soil or a worm crawling just below the surface without digging blindly. They don't need to see the insect. They can hear the movement and smell the chemical traces it leaves behind. Imagine you're walking your garden on a summer night. The moon is thin and there's a distant hum of traffic. A hedgehog, tiny and determined, pads along the fence line. It pauses, twitches those tiny ears like a director listening for a cue, and lowers its nose toward the earth. You'd think it's fumbling around, but it's actually reading a layered map made of smell and sound. That sniff tells it whether the path ahead has been walked before, whether there's a puddle nearby, or whether the compost heap holds a late-night banquet. Familiar places register like touchstones, even without light. Hedgehogs memorize borders and landmarks through scent and sound, so they can find their way even on the darkest nights. Their nightly patrols are quieter than most of our routines. Unlike a human who might drive a few miles to the shop, a hedgehog travels on foot along the same silent routes. Hedgerows, garden fences, the margins of fields. While your world sleeps, a single hedgehog can travel surprisingly long distances. Think of it as a slow, steady beat. It moves steadily, pauses to forage, and keeps going, sometimes covering a kilometer or more over a single night. For a small creature, that's impressive. Those long walks aren't aimless either. They follow scent lines, corridors of familiar odors that link feeding sites, nesting spots, and safe hiding places. Food is the motivation behind a lot of this movement. Hedgehogs are opportunistic foragers with a palate for the crunchy and the slimy. Beetles, ground-dwelling larvae, worms that come up after rain, slugs that appear on cool evenings, and even fallen fruit when it's available. Their taste isn't picky, but they have preferences. Beetles and their larvae are high on the list because they're abundant and nutritious. On wet nights, worms surface and become a jackpot. Slugs are easy, plentiful snacks, and fruit that drops from trees adds variety and quick energy. Because they forage at night, hedgehogs often take advantage of the invertebrates that are active after dark, or those disturbed by the cover of darkness. Beyond food, this nocturnal lifestyle offers safety. Night hides hedgehogs from many daytime predators and from human activity. A busy daytime garden can be dangerous. Children playing, cats prowling, lawnmowers roaring. At night, hedgehogs move when disturbances are lower, and their specialized senses are most effective. Their spines are a good last line of defense, but their best strategy is to avoid trouble by staying out of the spotlight and relying on those finely tuned noses and ears. If you want to imagine their sensory world, think of it like listening to a layered song. The bass is the steady hum of nearby roads or the wind in trees. Above that are the mid-tones, the chorus of crickets, the scuttle of beetles. On top of that, tiny percussive sounds, a worm shifting in the soil, the faint crackle of a leaf as an insect moves. Hedgehogs parse all of that and decide which notes matter. They don't need a high-resolution picture. They need a soundtrack they can act on. There's something deeply relatable about that. We all have moments when one of our senses kicks in and guides behavior. The smell of coffee that pulls you downstairs, the sound of rain that tells you to stay in, the way a familiar route can be walked with half your attention because it's become part of muscle memory. Hedgehogs are living that every night. They trust their sensory instincts, and in doing so they thrive in a world that looks, to our daytime eyes, like a place of shadows. That trust shows in their confidence. A hedgehog will confidently follow a scent line under a fence or make its way across a lawn with the quiet determination of someone who knows their neighborhood. You might have noticed them in your own garden, a small bundle of prickles moving with purpose. If you watch from a respectful distance, you'll see the timing of their pauses, the way they tilt their head to listen, the minute adjustments of their nose as they refine a scent, and you'll understand how perfectly built they are for life after dark. As you think about the hedgehogs in your area, consider how human habits affect their night shift. A bright porch light, a noisy late-night lawnmower, or an unfamiliar dog in the yard can break the delicate balance they depend on. But simple, thoughtful actions, leaving a little wild corner, checking your compost heaps before lighting them, or creating hedgehog-friendly gaps in fences, can keep those nocturnal corridors open. So next time you step outside after dusk and feel the world go quiet, spare a thought for these small, dedicated night workers. They're not just charming garden visitors, they're highly tuned nocturnal navigators, built to read a world in scents and sounds we barely notice. And while most of us sleep, they're out there doing the important, patient work of keeping the garden's midnight life in motion. Chapter 4. Surprising Diet Choices. You might have grown up seeing hedgehogs in storybooks lapping from saucers of milk, but before you set out a cute dish for a wild visitor, here's a reality check that surprised me the first time I learned it. Milk can actually make hedgehogs very sick. Unlike the cartoon image, most adult hedgehogs are lactose intolerant. Give one dairy and you'll likely invite stomach cramps, diarrhea, and a trip to a wildlife rescue. So if you love the idea of helping a prickly neighbor, skip the saucer and reach for something safer. What's fascinating is what hedgehogs really favor when they're out foraging. In the wild, they're not dainty nibblers. They're insect specialists with impressively strong jaws. Think of them as miniature crunch machines. I remember crouching behind a hedge one evening, flashlight in hand, and watching a hedgehog tackle a beetle the size of a thumbnail. It didn't nibble politely. It crushed that shell like a seasoned jaw pro. Their teeth and bite force allow them to crack through tough exoskeletons, shells, and even the odd snail's hard armor. To me, it felt a bit like watching someone at a lobster roll stand, efficient, determined, and oddly satisfying. Their diet isn't limited to insects either. Hedgehogs will take advantage of whatever protein-rich morsels they can find. Juicy beetles, slugs, earthworms, but also things that might surprise you. Small bones, bird eggs, frogs, and even tiny snakes on occasion. I once read a study that cataloged hedgehog diets and noticed how often bones appeared in the scat samples. It drove home that these little mammals aren't picky biscuit eaters. Their stomachs are built to handle tough stuff that many of us would instinctively avoid. That same robust digestive system, along with a pretty resilient immune system, allows hedgehogs to consume prey items that carry parasites or toxins that other animals steer clear of. That doesn't mean they're invincible. They still face risks from eating the wrong things in human environments. For example, slug pellets or pesticides can poison the invertebrates hedgehogs eat and then poison the hedgehogs themselves. But in a natural setting, their physiology lets them exploit a niche, a willingness and ability to process high-protein, low-fat animal prey that many other small mammals won't touch. If you care for hedgehogs, whether you're a rehabilitator or someone who leaves food out for a regular backyard visitor, it helps to understand these natural preferences. Good standby offerings that mimic their wild diet include meaty cat or dog food, ideally low-fat and protein-focused, unsalted cooked meats, and specially formulated hedgehog food from reputable sources. Avoiding dairy is crucial. If you want to offer liquid, clean water is the best choice. For snacking, dried mealworms or live mealworms, used sparingly, are closer to their natural prey than a bowl of milk and biscuits. There's a humbling moment for many of us when we realize how well adapted wildlife is to its own world. Hedgehogs' jaws and digestive tracts evolved for crunching, swallowing, and extracting nutrients from things we might judge as unappetizing. That adaptability even extends to their immune systems. They can tolerate certain bacteria and parasites present in their prey that would cause other small mammals trouble. That's not an invitation to test the limits. It's just a reminder that their survival strategies are different from ours. That said, I always encourage people to observe and enjoy rather than intervene unless the animal is clearly injured or in danger. There's a lot of joy in watching a hedgehog rootle through leaf litter. Hear the soft snuffle as it searches for beetle larvae, or see it roll briefly when startled. If you do want to help, aim to make your garden hedgehog-friendly. Keep a patch of leaf litter, avoid wood chip or gravel that can hide predators, and leave natural food sources rather than trying to substitute with dishes of human fare. One small, practical tale. A neighbor once complained that a hedgehog was visiting nightly and seemed to disappear quickly after they left milk. They were understandably concerned and wanted to help. We talked about replacing the milk with shallow bowls of fresh water and putting out a little cat food in the evening instead. Within a week, the hedgehog returned for longer visits, more lively and plumper than before. It was a simple swap, but seeing the same animal look healthier was a tangible reminder that small changes matter. Finally, remember the nuance. Hedgehogs will scavenge, and they'll take advantage of human-provided food if it's available. But their preference for crunchy, protein-rich prey is a core part of their identity. Respecting that, by providing appropriate options and protecting the habitat that supports beetles, slugs, and other invertebrates, does more for a hedgehog's well-being than any nostalgic saucer ever could. Next, we'll look at how to make a garden truly hedgehog-friendly without turning it into a wildlife buffet, and the simple landscaping choices that make a big difference. Chapter 5. Resistance to Venom. One of their strangest advantages is a partial resistance to certain toxins, including some snake venoms. It sounds like something out of a comic book, an animal that can take a bite and keep going. But that partial protection is real, and it plays out in ways that are both surprising and deeply practical. Imagine you're stalking through the underbrush. Your heart is steady, senses sharp, and then a flash of scales, a strike. For most animals, a venomous bite could mean collapse in minutes. For these creatures, it's more like a dangerous setback. The venom still hurts. It can still slow you down. But instead of being instantly felled, their bodies buy them time. They limp away, sometimes with a puncture wound the size of a thumb, and live to hunt another day. That's the difference between a single fatal mistake and a messy, recoverable encounter. What does partial resistance actually mean? First, it's important to be clear. This is not immunity. They're not invincible. Some venom types, high doses, or unlucky bites to a major artery can still be lethal. Partial resistance means their physiology reduces the worst effects. It blunts the blow enough that the animal can survive immediate danger, recover faster, or resist the systemic collapse that kills other species. In practical terms, it tilts the odds in their favor when a hunt goes wrong. So, how does it work? Researchers are still piecing that together, but the picture so far looks like a two-pronged defense. One part is biochemical. Their blood and bodily fluids contain molecules that can bind to, neutralize, or slow down certain venom components. Think of these molecules as bouncers. When venom toxins try to interact with critical targets in the body, these proteins or peptides intercept them. In lab tests, scientists have shown that serum from some of these animals can neutralize venom from particular snakes, preventing the toxins from wreaking their usual damage on nerve or blood clotting systems. That's a huge find, because it's a biological workaround rather than a simple, thicker skin. The other part is physiological and behavioral. Many of these animals have robust, fast-acting clotting and immune responses, or simply a lower sensitivity at key receptor sites that venom targets. That means even if some toxin gets through, it has fewer places to attach and do damage. They also tend to have high metabolic and repair capacities. Their bodies are good at cleaning up the mess, mending tissue, and dealing with inflammation. Plus, their behavior often complements the biology. They retreat, lick wounds, or adopt positions that limit venom spread until the body takes over. All of this is messy and variable. Resistance often depends on a long list of factors: the species and type of venom, the size and health of the animal, where it was bitten, and how much venom was injected. A small animal getting a full envenomation can still die. A larger, well-nourished one might survive with only a limp. That's why partial is the right word. It's not a guaranteed safeguard, just a meaningful advantage. Why would such a trait evolve? The simplest answer is evolutionary pressure. These animals live and hunt in environments where venomous snakes are common. Over generations, anyone with even slight resistance would be more likely to survive bites, recover, and pass on their genes. It's natural selection in action. Small biochemical tweaks that improve odds get amplified. For predators that regularly tussle with venomous prey, that survival edge is enormous. It changes their hunting strategy. They can afford riskier encounters and can target dangerous but nutrient-rich prey that other predators avoid. There's also a fascinating human angle. When researchers study these resistance mechanisms, they're not just curious about nature's oddities. They're thinking about medicine. The molecules in these animals' blood that bind venom could inspire new antivenoms or broad-spectrum toxin neutralizers. Current antivenoms are typically made by immunizing horses or sheep with small doses of venom and harvesting antibodies, a process that can be expensive, species-specific, and not always accessible in remote regions where snakebite is a serious public health issue. If we can isolate or mimic the natural venom-binding proteins from these animals, we might develop treatments that are cheaper, more stable, or effective against a wider range of venoms. A few concrete examples from the lab illustrate the promise. In controlled studies, serum from certain animals reduced venom-induced blood clotting problems, prevented paralysis in small test animals, or neutralized enzymes that cause tissue necrosis. Those aren't clinical treatments yet, but they're proof of principle. Nature has already evolved molecules that do something useful, and we can learn from them. There are, of course, ethical and practical considerations. We can't and shouldn't try to harvest these adaptations from wild animals in a way that harms populations. Instead, scientists aim to sequence the relevant genes, synthesize the proteins, and test them safely in laboratory settings. That way, we learn the chemistry without putting wild animals at risk. There's also the complexity that venom is not a single toxin, but a cocktail. A protein that neutralizes one component might not touch another. So translating these discoveries into broad treatments remains a big challenge. On a more personal level, I find it strangely comforting to know that nature has these kinds of unexpected safety nets. It's a reminder that evolution doesn't only craft dramatic weapons, it also builds subtle shields. And those shields don't just help the animals themselves, they can point us toward solutions for human problems. If you've ever had a close call, a car skid that didn't end in a crash, a health scare that resolved, you know the relief of a second chance. For these animals, partial venom resistance is a second chance built into biology. It also changes how we think about dangerous interactions in the wild. We tend to imagine predators and prey as locked in simple win-or-lose scenarios, but reality is more nuanced. A predator might escape a venomous prey and still be weakened for days, affecting its ability to hunt or mate. That ripple effect influences population dynamics in ways we're only beginning to grasp. The animal that lived through a bite might be less likely to catch the next meal which affects its cubs or den mates, which in turn changes local food webs. So this resistance has consequences beyond individual survival. It shapes ecosystems. Finally, the story of venom resistance teaches an important lesson. Adaptations that seem quirky or niche can have broad implications. A molecule that evolved to bind a toxin in the bloodstream of one species might someday save a human life. That perspective, seeing practical value in the oddities of nature, is one reason field biology and biochemistry are so exciting. Scientists aren't just cataloging curiosities, they're uncovering blueprints that could lead to real-world benefits. Next, we'll look at how researchers study these mechanisms in the lab, the experiments, the ethical safeguards, and the surprising hurdles that arise when you try to translate a natural defense into a medical tool. Chapter 6. The Mystery of Self-Anointing. That odd little ritual even has a name: self-anointing. Picture this. Your hedgehog catches a whiff of something unusual. A bar of soap, a strong spice, the scent of another animal, or even your perfume. It leans in, starts licking and chewing at the source, and in a few seconds you'll see foam forming around its mouth. Then comes the acrobatic part. A twist, a roll, a contortion that somehow manages to press that foamy, scented saliva against every spine. It looks like a tiny, concentrated spa treatment, but it's far stranger than any grooming routine. Watching it up close can feel like watching a mystery unfold. There's an almost frantic quality to the motion. The hedgehog seems compelled, urgent, as if it must coat itself. If you've ever seen one do this, you probably remember how expressive their little faces get during the process. Ears forward, eyes wide, tongue working at whatever object introduced the smell. For anyone who keeps or loves hedgehogs, that mix of oddity and cuteness creates an immediate connection. It's easy to anthropomorphize. Maybe the hedgehog likes the smell and wants to wear it like a new accessory. But scientists and keepers alike have been reluctant to pin down a single explanation. There are a few leading theories. One idea is camouflage. By smearing new, strong odors on their spines, hedgehogs might blend into their environment or mask their natural scent from predators or prey. Imagine if you could take a robust-smelling leaf and use it like a mask. It's not crazy to think a hedgehog could gain some advantage that way. Another popular hypothesis is defense against parasites or predators. Some of the things that prompt anointing are toxic or irritant substances, plants, chemical soaps, even cigarette smoke, which could repel parasites or make the hedgehog taste bad to a predator. In the wild, a hedgehog that can pick up and keep a noxious compound on its spines would be less inviting to anything that tries to bite or grab it. A different angle sees self-anointing as a response to intense sensory input. Hedgehogs have a keen sense of smell, and certain odors might overload their sensory system. The licking and salivating could be a physiological reaction to that intensity, with the subsequent smearing simply a byproduct of that reaction. Think of the human equivalents. When we get a whiff of something overwhelmingly fragrant, we might cover our mouth, sneeze, or sniff repeatedly. It's less strategic and more reflex. There are smaller, more specific possibilities too. Some researchers have observed that hedgehogs anoint more often when they encounter the scent of other hedgehogs, suggesting a role in social communication, maybe marking themselves with group odors or masking their individuality to reduce aggression. Young hogs might anoint more frequently than adults, which could point to learning or developmental stages in the behavior. And domesticated hedgehogs don't seem to have lost the habit. House pets will anoint on lotions, soaps, and even some foods their owners bring home. Despite all of these theories, no one is fully sure which, if any single one, is the whole story. The behavior is episodic and varies by individual and circumstance, which makes controlled studies tricky. Most of what we know comes from observation and small experiments, so the mystery persists. That uncertainty is part of the charm. A creature that seems so simple still holds a behavior that defies easy explanation. For viewers, there's a nice, relatable angle here. We humans also use scent deliberately. Perfume, deodorant, even laundry detergent are choices we make to alter how we're perceived or how we feel. Watching a hedgehog anoint is like watching a tiny, instinctual version of that same impulse. It's both familiar and foreign, a reminder that animals manipulate their environment in ways we don't always understand, but which echo our own little rituals. Next time you notice a hedgehog at a new smell, slow down and watch the sequence. Investigation, intense tasting, foaming, and the spine-coating twist. It's one of those behaviors that makes you smile and scratch your head at the same time. Charming, baffling, and quietly mysterious. Chapter 7. Hibernation. Life on low power. When the world cools and the nights stretch long, hedgehogs switch into a very different rhythm, one that's all about survival. Think of hibernation as a low-power mode, not unlike the way you dim your phone when the battery's running low. Only for hedgehogs, this power saving is life or death. In colder climates, a hedgehog preparing for winter will bulk up through late summer and autumn, turning insects, worms, and whatever tasty scraps it can find into a safety net of fat. That fat isn't just a cushion. It's the fuel they'll burn slowly while the world outside goes quiet. When temperatures drop enough, their bodies don't fight the cold so much as surrender to it. Their internal thermostat falls until their body temperature is almost the same as the surrounding air. It's like they've merged with the winter landscape, nearly invisible even at a physiological level. With that drop in temperature comes a dramatic slowdown of everything else. Their heart, usually beating briskly during active months, slows right down. Breathing becomes shallow and infrequent. Metabolism shifts into a whisper. Imagine your own heartbeat and breath stretched out, each beat taking much longer. That's how slow a hibernating hedgehog's body becomes. The animal is still alive, but it's conserving energy in the most extreme way possible. Because hibernation runs on stored fat, hedgehogs are finely tuned to avoid wasting that reserve. They'll remain in this torpor for weeks or months, waking only if something shakes their nest or if the weather changes dramatically. An unexpected warm spell might prompt them to stir, or a predator, a gardener's shovel, or a noisy disturbance could rouse them. And every time they wake, the body has to ramp up metabolism again, a costly process that burns a surprising amount of the energy they've hoarded. This is why late-season disturbances can be so dangerous. If a hedgehog is roused in November or December, it may burn through reserves that are meant to last the whole winter. There's no guarantee it will find enough food afterward to rebuild that deficit before the cold returns. For people who care about wildlife, that makes a simple act of caution, checking before clearing leaf piles, being gentle with garden maintenance, and avoiding unnecessary disruption, a very meaningful way to help. On a human level, we can relate to that feeling of needing to pull inward, when the world gets hard. We bundle up, slow our pace, and rely on what we've prepared. For hedgehogs, those winter preparations and the ability to stay undisturbed aren't conveniences. They're the strategies that let them wake up again in spring. Respecting that quiet time is one small, practical thing that helps these little survivors get through their longest, toughest sleep. Chapter 8. Rolling into a perfect ball. You know that little moment when you curl up under a blanket after a long day and the world feels instantly smaller and safer? Hedgehogs do something like that, but nature upgraded the idea. When danger looms, a hedgehog doesn't run. The animal becomes a living fortress. Under the skin, running around the hedgehog like a tight corset, is a single, powerful band of muscle. It may sound simple, but it's brilliantly effective. At the first sign of a threat, the hedgehog contracts that band, pulls its head, legs, and belly in, and slowly cinches itself into a near-perfect sphere of spines. Every soft part is tucked away, every vulnerable spot shielded. From the outside, you see only a ball of quills, immovable and uninviting. I don't know about you, but I find that image oddly comforting. The idea that a small creature has a button it can press and suddenly the world can't reach it. It's also a reminder. Survival tricks don't have to be complicated to work. This one muscle, coordinated and strong, does the job. Imagine a drawstring bag with everything valuable inside. Pull the string and no one gets in. Most predators learn this quickly. A fox, a foxhound, or a curious dog will sniff, prod, maybe try to roll the hedgehog over, and then walk away frustrated. There's nothing to grab onto, no soft belly to bite, no head to snap at without getting a painful mouthful of spines. For many animals, the cost of continuing the attack outweighs the reward. The hedgehog's tactic buys time, sometimes enough for predators to give up, sometimes long enough for the danger to pass. Of course, no defense is perfect. There are a few who've adapted ways to defeat the ball. Badgers are one. They're powerful and patient, able to rip and pry until a hedgehog is exposed. Some large birds of prey have also figured out techniques to break the defense. But those are the exceptions. Specialists who developed a specific counter strategy. For everyday threats, the tight roll is remarkably reliable. What I love about this is how relatable it feels. If you've ever felt overwhelmed and rolled inward emotionally, hedgehogs are doing the same thing, literally. They opt out of the fight, not through cowardice but through economy, using a simple, effective solution to a potentially dangerous problem. It's a small, stubborn refusal to be vulnerable. Visually, when you film this, it's a slow, deliberate motion. It's not an instant ball like a cartoon. The hedgehog tucks and tightens. Close-ups of the tiny paws drawing in, the nose disappearing, and then that final contraction give you a real appreciation for how the anatomy supports behavior. Cut to a predator's puzzled face, and you've got a scene that says more than words. Nature's problem-solving at its finest. If you ever encounter a hedgehog in the wild and it's rolled up, resist the urge to poke or prod. You're basically asking to be pricked. Give it space. Sometimes, understanding these small survival strategies makes them feel less like curiosities and more like old friends we've just met. The hedgehog's ball is one of those tiny marvels that's both practical and poetic. A little creature that learned how to disappear into its own armor and wait out the storm. Chapter 9. tiny feet, wide territory. Think of the hedgehog you've glimpsed under a porch light or beside a compost heap. That small, round body and those shuffling little legs make it easy to underestimate just how much ground they cover. But those tiny feet belong to surprisingly committed explorers. An adult hedgehog, moving at its own pace, can travel the equivalent of several sports fields in a single night. That image always surprises people. Something that looks so compact and slow in daylight is quietly patrolling a landscape the size of a neighborhood. Picture this. You're standing at the edge of your garden at dusk, a mug of tea in hand, and you spot a streak of motion by the fence. It's easy to think that animal only visits the patch of lawn where you saw it, but more often than not, that hedgehog is mid-route. These routes are not random. Hedgehogs learn and remember pathways that connect their nest, reliable food spots, and water. Over weeks and months, they stitch together a kind of underground map, moving between hedges, under gaps in fences, along the edge of a pavement, and across fields. To us, those places seem separate. Your backyard, the park behind the school, the vegetation strip along the road. But to a hedgehog, they're simply points on a nightly circuit. There's something quietly intimate in that image. Imagine someone in your town who walks the same path every night, dropping by a favorite bench to drink water, popping into a shop that leaves out scraps, then checking in with a friend's porch. You don't watch them every night, but you know they're part of the fabric of the place. Hedgehogs are like that. They sew together the small, fragmented patches of green that remain in our cities and suburbs, and by doing so, they maintain a hidden network of life. If you've ever let a bowl of water sit outside or left a compost heap alone, you might have unwittingly become part of a hedgehog's route. They prefer consistency, a place that often yields mealworms, beetles, slugs, or fallen fruit becomes a dependable stop. Over time, the same hedgehog may return to particular places in the landscape night after night. Biologists tracking hedgehogs with tiny GPS tags have shown how individuals can range widely, sometimes crossing roads and lawns to access a patchwork of resources. A hedgehog's territory can include gardens, allotments, hedgerows, fields, and even a bit of woodland, whatever offers food, shelter, and safety. That's why the idea of territory feels different for hedgehogs than it does for larger animals. They don't need huge tracts of unbroken wilderness, but they do need connectivity. Think of your neighborhood as a jigsaw puzzle. If a few pieces are missing, it still looks okay at a distance, but for a hedgehog, that gap can mean the difference between a safe, navigable route and a dangerous dead end. A narrow alley with a locked gate, a tightly closed fence, or a busy stretch of road becomes an obstacle that either detours or divides their nightly map. There's a gentle drama to watching that play out. I remember the first winter I paid attention to the hedgehog that visited my street. It was noisy rain and a muddy yard, but each night this little creature would appear, nose to the ground, moving in a slow, determined way. One week, a neighbor installed a tall fence that blocked the hedgehog's usual path. For a couple of nights I worried. Would it find another way, or would it stop appearing at all? Then, just as I'd started imagining it lost, I saw it again. Paws scraping the gravel on the other side of a broken pallet someone had left leaning against the fence. That pallet, unintended and temporary, gave the hedgehog a corridor. When something so small matters so much, it's a reminder that tiny actions, leaving a small gap or an undisturbed pile of leaves, can make an outsized difference. Because hedgehogs follow regular routes, Their presence can also indicate where the good bits of a neighborhood are. If you know where hedgehogs go, you can infer where food is plentiful and where shelter is available. That's one reason urban wildlife surveys often listen for hedgehog activity as a sign of a healthy green patch. And because hedgehogs move between gardens and fields, they act as quiet connectors, moving nutrients, dispersing invertebrates, and contributing to the ecological conversation between spaces we consider separate. The human dimension here is important. Most hedgehogs in towns and suburbs rely on a mosaic of private gardens. That means your backyard matters more than you might think. Leaving a small hole at the bottom of a fence, a hedgehog highway, can allow routine crossings. Not every garden needs to be a wilderness. Sometimes just a shallow gap or a soft patch of earth is enough for a hedgehog to include your plot in its nightly map. Likewise, putting out fresh water in shallow dishes during dry spells or allowing some leaf litter to remain can turn your space into a dependable waypoint. But roaming comes with risks. Roads slice through territories and create hazards. Predators, human pets, and pesticides all alter the landscape hedgehogs navigate. When their familiar routes are disrupted, hedgehogs can be forced into unfamiliar, more dangerous areas, or their energy budgets can be strained by longer detours. That's why conservation efforts often focus not only on protecting single sites, but on creating corridors, strips or stepping stones of habitat that reconnect the pieces. Even small measures taken by many people, leaving small holes in fences, avoiding slug pellets, providing shallow water, can add up into a hospitable network. It helps to think of hedgehogs as neighbors rather than wild extras. If you've ever noticed their footprints in soft soil, or those neat, round droppings in the corner of a flower bed, you've been part of their nightly itinerary. The story of a hedgehog is one of persistence. The same individual may visit a dozen places each night, quietly linking them together. That steadiness creates familiarity. People can play a role in maintaining that familiarity simply by making gardens permeable and friendly. And there's an emotional payoff to that. Knowing that a small, spiky body is out there, traveling between places you care about, gives a sense of continuity, a reminder that life threads through our built world in ways we might miss. The next time you see a hedgehog or leave the garden gate slightly ajar, imagine the route you've helped complete. You're not just seeing a cute animal, you're witnessing a tiny, nightly network in motion, a creature that uses perseverance and a consistent map to navigate a world pruned for people. Those tiny feet cover wide territory, not because they move fast, but because they are persistent, adaptable, and quietly connected to the places we share. Chapter 10: Secret Conversations. Even though hedgehogs are mostly solitary, they are far from mute. If you slow down and listen, really listen, you'll discover a hidden, haptic language playing out in the dark, right under our noses. These are not grand proclamations. They're pocket-sized conversations made of scent, small noises, and slow, patient gestures. They're intimate, private, and oddly familiar once you tune into them. Start with scent. For hedgehogs, smell is like a neighborhood notice board. They don't leave handwritten letters, but they leave chemical signposts, a dab of urine here, a careful rub of body against a low branch there. Think of it as hedgehog social media, short posts and subtle updates that say, "I was here," "I passed through," or "I'm interested." You don't see the message, but another hedgehog reads it with a nose that's maps and memory combined. These scent marks tell stories: who's been around, whether a spot is safe, if food has been found, or if a particular animal is in season. For animals that move through the world mostly alone, those invisible notes are how the community keeps in touch. The other layer is sound, and it's much richer than you might expect. When people think hedgehog, images of a tiny, spiky ball often come to mind, not a vocabulary. But hedgehogs have a surprising repertoire: snuffles, snorts, huffs, and soft clicks. Each has a flavor, a purpose. Snuffles are the everyday speech, quiet, searching noises as they nose through leaves and soil. If you've ever heard a persistent, wet rustling outside your window at night, it's probably a hedgehog on the hunt, nose down, making those gentle, eager snuffle sounds. To me, snuffling sounds like contentment wrapped in curiosity. It says, "Something here might be edible. I'll check." Snorts are sharper, a little impatient. Imagine someone pushing a chair back with a small, exasperated noise. Hedgehogs snort when they're mildly annoyed or when they're clearing the air. It's part complaint, part assertion. Back off a bit, that's mine. Huffs are broader and deeper, sometimes rhythmic, heard especially in more intense encounters. The huff has weight. It can be part of a warning or a prelude to more aggressive behavior. If two hedgehogs meet near a food source and things get tense, the huff might be the sound that escalates a polite exchange into a boundary-setting moment. Then there are soft clicks, delicate, like a tiny bird's tick. These are often associated with courtship or intimate exchange. They sound too small to be important, and yet they're the punctuation marks in a longer sentence of hedgehog interaction. Courtship, in particular, is one of those nocturnal dramas that makes me smile every time I think about it. Males don't rush it. There's no grand, flashy display, just a slow, noisy ritual that can stretch for hours. Picture a small, clumsy waltz performed at ankle height. A male will circle a female, not in silence, but with persistent snuffling and clicking, occasionally huffing as if to punctuate his interest. The female may respond with equal subtlety: a snort, a short retreat, a cautious acceptance. It's deliberate. The male keeps his distance, respectful and patient, circling and sniffing. The ritual can go on for what feels like forever, sometimes literally hours, until the female decides whether to accept or refuse the suitor. There's theater in this tiny world. I remember one night leaning against the kitchen window, thinking someone had left a faucet running. The sound was so regular and strange that I stepped outside and found two hedgehogs conducting what looked like a slow-motion conversation by the compost bin. The male circled, the female paused and rolled slightly, then nudged away. They made this series of little clicks and snuffles like punctuation marks between movements. I stood there, barefoot and ridiculous, watching this very private exchange unfold like a secret play performed for no audience but the moon. It felt intimate, like catching neighbors in mid-argument, but also comforting, as if life was quietly rehearsing itself just beyond my door. Those dramas often happen when most of us are asleep. You can sleep through the night thinking the garden is empty and miss a whole script of non-verbal talk. The flurry of snuffles when someone discovers a new patch of worms, the brief escalation of huffs when two animals argue over a sheltered spot, or the gentle clicking chorus of a courtship that finally resolves. It's humbling to realize how much life continues just below our awareness. Because their language is so subtle, the easiest way to become part of it, without intruding, is to become a listener. You don't need to be an expert to recognize the patterns. Sustained snuffling near a dish or under leaves usually signals foraging. Repeated rhythmic huffing and circling suggests a more charged interaction. Soft, persistent clicking is often tied to mating behavior. If you want to watch, keep your distance and your light gentle. Hedgehogs are sensitive to bright lights and disturbance. A dim red torch or a motion-activated low-glow camera will let you observe without changing the script. And there are practical ways to help that translate our curiosity into kindness. Leaving a shallow bowl of water or some suitable food in a quiet corner can give these nighttime actors an easier stage. Creating hedgehog-friendly borders, small, low gaps in fences, or leaf piles and log shelters, makes it easier for them to move and to leave and read their scent messages. But the most important thing is respect. Don't try to pick them up or force interactions. The richness of their conversations depends on privacy and safety. What I love about listening to hedgehogs is how it softens our idea of solitude. They remind us that being alone doesn't mean being lonely, and that communication doesn't have to be loud to be meaningful. There's a whole neighborhood of stories being told in whispers and chemical notes, and once you start paying attention, your garden becomes a small, nocturnal theater. Next time you hear a gentle snuffling at your doorstep or a soft clicking in the hedge, don't rush to shine a spotlight. Pause, breathe, and let the secret conversation continue. There's wisdom in the quiet that's worth protecting. Chapter 11. Young Hedgehogs and Their First Spines. Right after birth, the world looks and feels very different for a hoglet than it does for an adult hedgehog. Instead of the familiar armored silhouette we picture, newborn hedgehogs are almost unnervingly soft. Their spines aren't the sharp protective tools we recognize. They're pale, bendy, and tucked away beneath a thin layer of skin. It's a funny image. A creature we associate with prickliness begins life like a tiny, folded-up package, all pink skin and sleepy eyes. This softness is no accident. Those first hidden spines are a brilliant evolutionary workaround. Imagine the birthing process with a mother hedgehog. If her babies arrived with rigid, sharp spines, both mother and offspring could be injured during delivery. The thin skin covering the spines acts like a natural cushion. It keeps the newborns pliable during birth and helps prevent the mother from getting scratched as she pushes them out. In other words, nature gives the mother a brief, protective break so she can focus on getting her litter out safely. Then, something almost magical happens. And it happens fast. Within a matter of hours, that thin skin begins to contract, and the first spines start to show. It's not an overnight transformation into an armored ball, but those initial quills start poking through, small and pale at first. If you've ever watched those time-lapse clips of puppies or kittens growing, it's a similar kind of reveal. Features that were once hidden subtly press through and make the baby look more like the adult it will become. Those early spines are delicate, though. They aren't the rich, dark, stiff quills you see on grown hedgehogs. Over the following days and weeks, stronger and darker spines grow in to replace or overlay the first ones. The color shift from pale, almost translucent quills to the darker, banded spines of maturity happens gradually, and it's part of the hedgehog's developmental timeline. You can almost see the animal put on its armor a little at a time, until the transformation is complete and the hoglet can curl up with real protection. An important step that happens between those two stages, the moment when pale spines appear and when they harden and darken, is care from the mother. She cleans and warms her young, a behavior every parent can relate to. That warm, damp grooming isn't just comfort. It helps the newborn dry, stimulates circulation, and ensures the spines set properly. Think of it like a bath and a hug in one. The mother's attention helps the tiny spines firm up and prepares the hoglet to face the outside world. That timing is clever. The babies are soft while they come into the world, so the mother isn't hurt. And then, once she's able to tend them, the spines start appearing and hardening, giving the young fast, necessary protection. You can almost imagine the mother thinking, "Okay, you're safe now. Time to get you armored up." It's a balance between vulnerability and protection that's beautifully timed by nature. For anyone who's seen hoglets in real life, and maybe even felt that urge to pick one up and cuddle it, it helps to remember how fragile they are in those first hours. Those pale spines might look harmless, and the whole animal looks like a baby, but the process of spine development is delicate. Handling newborns can interfere with the mother's instinct to clean them, and can even chill the babies. Heat matters. After birth, they need the warmth of their mother's body to regulate their temperature and to help their early spines set correctly. When the mother is present and can do her job, hoglets get the best start. Behaviorally, young hedgehogs react differently at each stage. In those first hours, they're sleepy and dependent, often nestled against their mother, relying on her smell, warmth, and milk. As their spines emerge and strengthen, they become more curious and a touch more mobile. You'll see them start to shuffle, nuzzle for position, and occasionally wriggle if disturbed. Their senses are still developing, but the practical advantage of growing spines quickly is that even a partially spined hoglet can begin to protect itself in simple ways. For instance, curling slightly or burying its head when threatened. There's also a tenderness in this transition that's easy to relate to as a human. Think about a human newborn's first days. Fragile skin, a reliance on a parent's touch. The way a mother's care helps a baby adjust to a new environment. Hoglets don't smile or coo in the same way, but their dependency and the mother's attentiveness create a similarly emotional tableau. Watching a hoglet go from a soft sleeping bundle to a little ball with peaking spines is, in small animal terms, the equivalent of watching a child take a first tentative step. Awkward, a little wobbly, and completely stirring. For anyone filming or photographing hedgehogs, that window when the first spines are popping through is visually fascinating. The contrast between the vulnerable newborn and the tiny quills emerging gives you a front row seat to an important survival strategy. But if you're near a nest, keep the human urge to interact in check. Disturbance at that stage can interrupt the mother's grooming, leave the hoglets cold, or even cause the mother to abandon them if she senses threat. There's a gentle line between observation and interference, and the safest thing for these little ones is often a quiet distance and a watchful heart. In short, hoglets begin life soft and concealed, a design that safeguards their mother at birth. Within hours, that concealment gives way to the first pale spines, and as days pass, those spines firm and darken, guided by the mother's cleaning and warmth, so the young hedgehogs quickly gain the protection they need. It's one of those small, profoundly practical rhythms of nature that, when you witness it, makes you appreciate just how thoughtfully animals are built to survive and thrive. Chapter 12: City Life and Hidden Dangers. Out in town, the line between wild and domestic is narrower than most of us realize. Walk through a park at dusk or peek over a fence into a neighbor's untidy garden, and you're likely to spot the same signs I do. A small, curled silhouette under a hedge, snuffling along a compost heap, or a trail of little footprints in the soft earth. Hedgehogs have quietly become city dwellers. They've learned to make use of the food we leave out, the shelter of hedges and sheds, and the warmth that human activity often brings. That's the good news. And it's why a few small changes in our yards and routines can mean a huge difference to them. But alongside those comforts come real dangers. I remember one evening walking back from the shops and finding a hedgehog stunned by a car's headlights on the edge of a quiet road. Another time I lifted the lid of a garden drain and found tiny claw marks on the edge, a reminder that uncovered drains are traps for curious animals. In neighborhoods where people spray pesticides and slug pellets without thinking, hedgehogs are poisoned by eating contaminated prey. And fences that keep pets in and kids safe can become invisible prisons for hogs, blocking the only routes they have between gardens. If you love the idea of seeing these little creatures in your garden, the great news is you don't need to become a wildlife engineer. Think small, practical, and consistent. Start with access. Hedgehogs travel between gardens at night, and a solid fence can fragment their route. I made a habit of asking my neighbors if I could cut a small gap, about 13 centimeters, at the bottom of fences. It's barely noticeable, but it creates a hedgehog highway. In mine, I rounded the edges and left it on the less visible side of the shed so it didn't look like a hole in a fence. Within weeks, the number of visits from hedgehogs increased. Creating wilder corners helps too. Most of us are trained to tidy every inch of our gardens, but a little controlled mess is gold for wildlife. A pile of logs, some leaf litter, or an overgrown corner provides nesting material and bugs for food. I converted a small side patch into a no-mow zone and planted some native shrubs. It quickly became the favorite foraging spot. It's about giving them choices: a sheltered bramble patch to hide in, a compost heap to root through, and a dry place to nest when the weather turns. Water is often overlooked. Hedgehogs need water, especially in warm, dry spells. A shallow bowl left out in the evening is appreciated. Just change it daily to keep it fresh. Make sure the edges are low so they can drink without struggling, and place it near a hedgehog-friendly route so they can find it easily. At the same time, we need to remove hazards. Keep an eye on pesticides and slug pellets. The short-term tidy-up they promise can be lethal to wildlife. Opt for wildlife-friendly pest control methods: hand-picking, beer traps for slugs, or copper tape for pots. And before lighting bonfires, check carefully. Hedgehogs sometimes nest in leaf piles. Likewise, cover or provide escape ramps for drains, and be careful with strimmers and lawn mowers. Always check for critters before you start. Cars are a harder problem because they're part of modern life. But there are practical things we can do. Slow down in residential areas, especially at dusk and dawn. Park considerately so hedgehogs can move between gardens. And if you have a driveway, check beneath cars and under wheel arches in summer evenings before starting the engine. Even switching to passive measures like reflective cat scarers on wheel wells can make a small difference. Finally, make it social. Talk to neighbors, create a small map of hedgehog-friendly access points, or put up a note about avoiding pesticides. I found that once a couple of neighbors knew why I'd made a gap in the fence, they made one too. Suddenly, the whole street became a corridor rather than a series of islands. These changes don't demand a huge overhaul of your life or garden. They're small, thoughtful adjustments that let us share space more kindly. If you picture your garden as part of a larger neighborhood habitat, the idea of a hedgehog navigating from one safe spot to another becomes simple and achievable. And honestly, it's a joy. Catching a glimpse of a prickly snout at dusk, or hearing the soft rustle of little feet in the leaves makes any small effort more than worth it. Chapter 13. Ancient Survivors. They've been around so long that when you hold a hedgehog in your imagination, you're holding a creature whose great line stretches back through time in a way that feels almost family-like. Picture one of those tiny, prickly bodies curling into a tight ball. Not a random trick, but a habit honed by tens of millions of years of being just small enough, quiet enough, and clever enough to keep going. Think about your own survival habits. Not the dramatic stuff, but the small choices. You carry an umbrella because the forecast said rain. You pick a quieter route home because it feels safer. You keep snacks in your bag for late nights. Hedgehogs built their survival the same way, through countless tiny strategies stacked over generations. Their formula is simple and brutally effective. Be small, avoid conflict, eat what's readily available, and be active when bigger predators are not. That simplicity is their genius. Fossils tell us that hedgehog-like animals were around in the age of great change. While ice came and went and forests shifted, their ancestors adapted. They weren't trying to outmuscle the big beasts. They outlasted them by being modest in every sense. Their body plan stayed practical. A compact frame, a nose tuned to sniff out beetles and worms, and an armor of spines that says, "Don't bother." When climate swings made food scarce, their diet flexibility, snails one season, insects the next, kept them fed. When new predators rose, nocturnal habits reduced risk. The result? A lineage that persisted while others vanished. There's a humility in that survival style we can all relate to. We don't have to be the loudest voice in the room to make it. Sometimes, doing the small, consistent things, finding the reliable sources of food or income, avoiding needless fights, moving in times and ways that reduce danger, compounds into resilience. Put another way, hedgehogs are persistence personified. They didn't invent flashy defenses, they perfected restraint. I like to imagine one of those ancient hedgehogs shuffling beneath a tree while a bigger, showier mammal roamed nearby. The larger animal might have had a more dramatic life, bigger meals, fierce contests over mates, but also greater risk. A single misstep for the large species could be catastrophic. The hedgehog's life, by contrast, was about careful timing. Move when shadows lengthen and the big hunters rest. Find a nest in leaves and wait for safe moments. It's almost like watching someone who knows their own limits and uses them to survive. And yet, being small didn't mean being insignificant. The ecosystems of the past depended on these little foragers. By eating insects and invertebrates, they helped control populations and recycle nutrients. By being prey, they supported predators. Their existence knitted together many ecological threads. Modern hedgehogs carry that legacy. When you see one foraging under a street lamp or snuffling through your garden, you're seeing a living thread from that ancient tapestry. there's also a comforting message here for how we cope with change. In a world that often feels like it rewards only scale and spectacle, hedgehogs remind us that longevity comes from consistency. Their success wasn't about sudden innovation, but about steady, reliable tactics repeated across generations. If you ever feel overwhelmed by rapid shifts, career changes, family upheavals, climate worries, think like a hedgehog for a moment. What small, repeatable choices can you lock in that will carry you forward? What routines can you adopt that, over years, add up to safety and strength? Finally, every hedgehog you see today is the payoff of countless tiny decisions made across evolutionary time. A slight preference to stay hidden, a nose shaped to find a worm in the dark, a spine that discourages curiosity. Those choices aren't conscious, of course. They're encoded in genes and behavior, but they're no less powerful. So next time one rustles through fallen leaves outside your window, remember you're watching an ancient survivor. You're witnessing a living strategy for sticking around, quiet, practical, and enduring. And somehow, that makes the little prickly creature feel less like an oddity and more like a wise, familiar neighbor who's been quietly getting through the long nights for millions of years. A hedgehog pauses by the path, listens, then slips back into the grass. For most of us, it will stay a brief shadow with spines. Now you know more of the life inside that shape. If this quiet journey kept you company, subscribe and tell me where you're watching from. Close your eyes, breathe slowly, and rest. Rest well. I'll see you next time.